Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to do a little demonstration video on making a wine bottle stopper. This is my first instructional video, so let's have some fun. Starting out with basically my 4-jaw Penn State Industries chuck, Barracuda 2. Have my piece of wood clamped in here nice and tight. And this is generally how I start my bottle stoppers, and I'm going to start just by rounding out the bulk of it from about here to the end, and then I'm going to square off the end, drill and tap a hole for my bottle chuck and bottle stopper chuck. Then we're going to turn it around and finish the shape. So we're just going to get started here. So you can see I've roughed out the round shape of it, and we're going to drill a hole in the center right now. I've got my little drill chuck on my tailstock, and we're going to put in a 5/16 drill bit, brad point drill bit. Move it into position and lock it down. I'm going to slow my speed down and just crank the handle on the end here and bring my drill in. Only going to go about 5/8, 3/4 of an inch deep, and we're going to back out. Turn the lathe off. And we're going to put in a 3/8/16 bottoming tap that I use for tapping the threads, and this is where it'll mount to the bottle stopper hardware when we're all done. And this I'm just going to do by turning the crank on the end by hand and literally turning this in, cutting the threads. And we'll just go until it bottoms out, and then we'll back it out. And we've hit bottom, so we'll just reverse the direction and back it out. Kind of pulling on it a little bit as we back out so we don't damage the threads. And we're done with that. Now what I want to do, I like to drill that hole, drill and tap that hole before I face off the backside and make it flat and smooth, because it's a little hard to get the little dimple off the end if there's not a hole there already, if it's just a solid piece of wood. So I do that last. So for that I'm going to use my parting tool. If I can find it amongst the dust here. There it is. I'm going to use my parting tool, and we're going to go on a pretty slow speed. Crank it up a little bit here. That looks pretty nice, and now we're just going to do a little sanding on it so that we can flip it around. Start out with an 80 grit just to get the worst of the turning marks off of it, and back down to about a 120. to 220. It doesn't need to be beautiful and highly polished because that's the part that's going to get covered up by the bottle stopper hardware anyway, so it just needs to be good and flat and smooth. So now, with my chuck key, I'm going to take this piece out of the lathe, out of the chuck, and just set it aside. And we're going to remove the chuck and set that aside. And then I've got my bottle stopper mandrel here. It threads right onto my headstock, and with my newly drilled and tapped hole, that threads right onto my mandrel. And that, believe it or not, is enough strength to hold this thing while I turn it down to final shape and do all my sanding and finishing and everything. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish rounding out the rest of this here, and I'm going to start working on the overall shape, and from there we'll go into sanding and finishing. So here we go. Pretty rough at this point, but we're just kind of getting into the shape, working it down. never really know exactly what the shape's going to be when I make them. They just kind of come out different every time. It's kind of fun to just play with it. I like the way this one's turning out. A little bit different than what I've ever done. So the grain on this is real pretty too. I'm going to do some rough sanding on it now, just to kind of get the burrs off of it. Then we'll do some detail turning. Shaping up nicely. I'll try and sand from this side so you can see what I'm doing. Going to add some groove details to it. If I can find my correct tool, here we go. Just something to make it interesting. Give it a little more visual appeal. And now we're going to do some finish sanding. Try and put an end to this. Looks like I got the bulk of the sand marks out of it with the rough sandpaper, 120 grit. Now we're going to go down to some real fine stuff. We're going to start out with 400 grit, and then we're going to go to 600 and 1500. so we can get a nice polished finish on it. This doesn't really remove a lot of material, it just kind of takes the sanding marks out of it. Makes it prettier. It's looking better already. Now we're going to go up to the 600 grit, or actually down to the 600 grit, that's a finer. And I'm just using regular aluminum oxide paper, nothing fancy. It's the cheap stuff. 80 cents a sheet or something ridiculous like that, and I cut it up into little pieces. And I collate it and put it into piles so that I can just pull them off in the order I need them. 400 grit, 600 grit, 1500 grit. Have a stack about that high. Makes the whole process go a little nicer. Don't have to deal with the little stuff. Getting more of a polish to it here. And now we're going to crank it up to the 1500 grit paper. If I'd use the right side, it would help. And there we go. It's all polished, nice and smooth. I'm going to try and get into the grooves a little bit there. So feel a little bit of roughness on those grooves. Still a little bit of roughness there. That's better. Now we're going to put some finishing touches on it. I use the Hut Crystal Coat from Penn State Industries. Shake it up really good, and we just take some paper towels. We turn on the lathe at low speed, as low as we can go, and we just put a couple drops on there. And it dries as it's spinning. We'll do a second coat, and a third coat, and a fourth coat. It's that quick. Gives a nice hard finish that lasts quite a long time. I use this on my pens as well, and I also make little necklace pendants. I'll use it on that and some other things. Purse hangers that I make. The ladies like those. And just one last coat here. Now I like to crank up the speed and just polish it. Polishes it and just make sure the coat is all dried. Look at that. It's got some real pretty grain on it. It's a nice one. So now we're going to take it off of the lathe. If it'll come off, there we go. First thing I like to do is just put a little bit of finish on the end of it, since that didn't get coated. I generally just put a drop on there, spread it around, and call it a day. Because that's, again, the end that's going to be covered up by the hardware. So, we have our Penn State Industries standard bottle stopper hardware. Unbox that. Unbag it. And just thread it into place. And there you go. Finished bottle stopper. Thanks for watching.